Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 344. In this episode, we are continuing our journey through the Fall of Númenor by exploring the chapter 1075, Tar-Ancalimë becomes the first ruling queen of Númenor. Before we get started, I'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stig 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsht. Very nice. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, and KG. And a big thank you to our newest patrons, Wilbo Baggins, Brian B., and Emiel K. Thank you so much for joining our fellowship. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in August of 2023. Ann E., Garrett P., Mario G., Matt R., Ben D., Lauren H., William H., Henry B., Jonathan L., Austin B., and Carol W. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. Join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lends you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. If you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, attention binge listeners, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps to get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. All right. Having covered the life and significance of one of Númenor's most important rulers, Tar-Aldarion, we now turn to a rather brief description of the reign of his daughter, Tar-Ancalimë, the first ruling queen of Númenor. The original source for this chapter is Unfinished Tales. Really two sections from Unfinished Tales. First, the Line of Elros, and then the Mariner's Wife. So the little snippets we get are both from Unfinished Tales. So what do we know about Tar-Ancalimë? Well, let's look at the text, shall we? Tar-Ancalimë. In 1075, she becomes the first ruling queen of Númenor. There had been all men before that. She is 202 years old at the time, and she is 412 years old at her death. It's the second longest reign. She reigns for 205 years. The first, of course, is the reign of Elros, 421 years. Elros is, I guess, the Cal Ripken of Númenorian rulers. No one's ever going to break that record. It's a pretty magnificent thing. If you're a baseball person, you'll know what I'm talking about with the Cal Ripken reference. And it is the third longest lifespan of a Númenorian ruler. Second at this point, but it will be the third in the grand scheme of things. She is bested only by Elros and Tar-Ancalimë, who will come a bit further down the line. So aside from the kind of the big picture details about her life, the years in which she reigned, we only get a few details in this section. The first we get is that it's kind of some palace intrigue, if you will. Her first cousin, Soranto, was the eldest male grandchild of Tar-Meneldur. He is the son of Eilionel, one of Aldarion's sisters. The rule was that if the eldest daughter of the king, as the king's heir, remained unwed beyond a certain time, then she would have to resign the heirship. Now, this was all a product of her father, Aldarion, changing the law of succession in Númenor. And we can take a quick look at that over here on the great resource Tolkien Gateway. So originally, the law of succession had simply been the eldest heir, the eldest male heir of the king, right? So that was the rule. Women could not be women in the line of the current king could not become the rulers of Númenor. But Tar-Aldarion, only having the one child of Ancalimë, changes this law and makes it so that Ancalimë can become the queen. The rule is essentially broken down this way. The eldest son of the king was first in line. If the king had no sons, his eldest daughter would be offered the heirship, but she was free to refuse. And if the king's eldest daughter refused, the king's nearest male kinsman, whether by male or female descent, would become the king's heir. If the eldest daughter of the king became king's heir, she would have to resign if she remained unwed beyond a certain time. Any potential king's heir who wed outside the line of Elros would become ineligible for the heirship. So that's where things stand here when Saranto is, kind of giving Tar-Ancalimë a hard time about whether or not she is going to actually become the queen. It seems that he is pressing her to resign, probably with the thought in mind that, well, this is my chance to become the king of Númenor. So, despite Saranto, she marries Hallakar. Now, we might remember a little bit about Hallakar from the actual story, from our overview of Aldarion and Eärendis. Hallakar was essentially a 5 generations back relative of Tar-Ancalimë. So they had kind of a little romance that you can read about in that chapter, but it had quickly gone south. But he was kind of the only male available to her. I guess we could maybe put it that way for a variety of reasons. And so she decides she's going to marry Hallakar to kind of really spite Sarantor. So just so you know, the connection, the common ancestor goes back to Vardamir, who was the son of Elros, was supposed to be the second king of Númenor, but as soon as he became king, he resigned the scepter to his son. So he ruled for a very brief period of time, really didn't rule at all. It's just kind of like written as 1 year and, in the official records, if you will. So that is their common ancestor going back 5 generations. I think it's interesting that Tar-Ancalimë does this in his despite, so in Saranto's despite, and not out of love of Hallakar. We do get a little bit more about her in The Mariner's Wife, of course, but this is all before she later becomes queen. However, it does seem that she inherited a spirit of bitterness from her mother, something that it's clear Eärendis fostered in her only child. Bitterness, of course, doesn't seem like the best motivational factor for a ruler. She has only one child, Anarion, and after his birth there is strife between her and Hallakar. So this theme of bitterness, this spirit of bitterness that you can detect in Tar-Ancalimë, this is the thing that stood out most to me in reading about her reign, even going back to the little bit more we get about her from the actual Mariner's Wife tale. She really maybe starts off as, just a fairly normal girl, but it seems to be under the influence of Eärendis, and I'm not trying to place all the blame on Eärendis, but maybe the influence of Eärendis, and the fact that her father is very absent for most of her childhood seems to lead to this, spirit of bitterness kind of, dominating her persona even during her reign. Give me one moment here. All right. So the spirit of bitterness is really what dominates Tar-Ancalimə's reign, it would seem. We also learn that she is proud and willful. And, again, these are not what we would think of as desirable qualities in any ruler, especially maybe as the subjects of this ruler, though perhaps they aren't the worst qualities to have. After all, one does have to deal with all kinds of individuals vying for influence, and perhaps pride and willfulness in a ruler can help to prevent the undue influence of others. Nevertheless, we aren't told of any qualities that soften her. There's no note that her pride was balanced by a spirit of benevolence toward the people or even her son. In fact, all we get is this rather disastrous-sounding note. She neglects Aldarion's policies and gives no further aid to Gil-galad. Now, you'll recall that Aldarion had done a lot of work when he had traveled back to Middle-earth, building sort of this friendship with Gil-galad and the elves of Lindan. And it had even culminated in the delivery of this letter from Gil-galad to Tar-Meneldor, which inspired Tar-Meneldor, considering the dire situation back in Middle-earth, to resign the scepter and hand it over to his son Tar-Aldarion. But Tar-Ancalimë actually goes so far as to give no further aid to Gil-galad, almost seeming to be in spite of her father Aldarion. It says she neglects Aldarion's policies and gives no further aid to Gil-galad. Now you can read that as she just doesn't care, or you can read that as she purposefully neglects, right? She chooses to neglect as kind of a passive-aggressive move. Given that we just learned about Sauron's establishment of Mordor 75 years prior to the start of her reign, this doesn't indeed seem like ill timing. And it's not even explained. Was it simply a way of getting back at her father for his neglect of her and her mother? Perhaps, but as the ruler, your role is not to seek your own personal and petty interests, but the common good of the realm. Given the letter of Gil-galad sent to Tar-Aldarion that we read about a few chapters ago, the elves of Lindon were surely relying upon the friendship of Númenor in this time. So Tar-Ancalimə's neglect is a major blow. It's just got to be considered a major blow for the state of things back in Middle-earth. Now, we'll consider the reign of her son Anarion in the next episode, but the important thing to note about the reign of her son is that Anarion's 2 daughters refuse the queenship because they dislike and fear Tar-Ancalimë. Tar-Ancalimë, in response, does not allow them to marry. Seems like a strange thing, right? But that, again, kind of feeds back into this idea that Tar-Ancalimë seems to be, very inspired and habited by this spirit of bitterness. It's a strange, almost irrational action on Tar-Ancalimə's part, because perhaps because she had an unhappy marriage, she doesn't want her granddaughters to even have the possibility of happy ones. It's a curious note that they refused the heirship because they had a younger brother, Surion, who by law would have been first in line as Anarion's eldest son. So remember those laws of succession we just looked at. It actually, if the only they actually wouldn't have been under consideration with Surion as the son of Anarion because it would have passed to him even as the youngest child, because he was the male heir. He was the eldest male heir. Now, even if he had died or if he hadn't been born, only the eldest of the 2 daughters would have been considered as the heir. The younger one would not have been considered as the heir. So it's kind of interesting wording here. I'm not sure if, maybe Tolkien, if he'd had a chance to go back and revise this himself, would have written it quite that way. But it is what it is. So, in summary, that's kind of the wrap-up that we get from this. And before I give you some closing thoughts, let's consider the images that are a part of this chapter here. So the first one we get is a profile of Tar-Ancalimë as ruling queen. Not sure what to make of this image. It's not a particularly warm or friendly-looking image. It's, she looks rather cold, hard to read. I'm not sure what any of y'all would make of it, but I think it's really interesting when we actually juxtapose this image with the second image that's in this chapter, an image of a tree with no leaves in what appears to be a Númenorian city. I believe this is the elven tree that was gifted to Aldarion and Arendis at their wedding. We know it was planted in the courtyard of Armenelos, and Aldarion actually named it Tar-Ancalimë after his daughter. He blessed it at one point, saying, "May you and she stand so in long life, unbent by wind or will, and unclipped." However, in this image, it seems to mirror the state of Tar-Ancalimë in later life, no longer flowering and beautiful, but instead bare and stern. I believe it is intended to juxtapose the image of Tar-Ancalimë that opened this chapter. So in a way, these are like kind of bookends to this chapter, right? They're literally bookends, but also these 2 images inform one another and kind of and make a commentary on this short chapter as it is. So a nice touch here with including these two pencil sketches to begin and end this chapter on Tar-Ancalimë. So to close out this rather short chapter, what have we learned? Perhaps most importantly, we have seen how the marital strife of Aldarion and Arendis has begun to ripple down through the succeeding generations of Númenor's rulers. Things will truly never be the same. With the strife of Middle-earth having entered in, even remotely, to the idyllic existence of Númenor, it has become less an earthly paradise and more a stronghold of men. Indeed, Tar-Ancalimə's bitter disposition and consequent policies are already harmonizing with the workings of Sauron. In a way, the darkness of her parents' marriage is an early harbinger of the Shadow's return. Next time, we'll consider the reigns of her son and her grandson, as well as the political situation in Middle-earth circa Second Age 1200. All right, well, that's about it for this episode. As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Melkor27, KG, Emilio P., Jonathan D., Robert H., Paul D., Julia, Werty, JoeBagelMan, Richard K., Matt R., Matthew W., John W., Eugene D., Chris B., Daniel S., Seb M, Cory C, Carolyn S, Emiel K, Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T, Redhawk, Shannon S, Brian O, Zeke F, James L, Chris L, Asya V, Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C, David of Pints with Jack, and Eric B. Thank you all so much to our amazing fellowship. We truly appreciate you. And thank you to everybody for watching and or listening. We will talk at you next time. Bye-bye.